And I can remember the bulls. Daddy would remind me about the bulls. And I was given very thorough instructions about not going over the fence into the horse lot because of the livestock. My grandmother had a chicken that would attack a turkey that would attack me when I was 2, 3 years old. It scared me to death. You know, the turkeys put to spread their legs out. It scared me so badly.
So did you all wind up eating the turkey?
Yes.
For Thanksgiving?
Yes. It was very fulfilling.
So did you have brothers and sisters?
No, I was an only child. And I lived in the home with my parents and my uncle, Mamie and Galwin Shula. And it was a big house, about 20 rooms, 14 to 20 rooms. And so there was plenty of room for all of us. So it worked out real well.
So you were an only child. Were you lonely or bored as a child?
No. I was very self-sufficient. And I was brought up to take care of a lot of things for myself. But my parents were wonderful. And my aunt and uncle were wonderful. And we had great neighbors. And I played with the tenant children and the neighbors' children and everybody's children. So I had a lot of friends. And the Roberts' daughter was one of my best friends. So she and I stayed back and forth at each other's house and that kind of thing. Double dated through the teenage years and so. Mm-hmm. And so we were just the best of friends. And so was Mr. Johnson's daughter with a store right next door to the Robertses. And I was never lonely because I loved to read, and I grew up with an imagination, so I could make up games and such.
Did you get into any mischief?
Ooh, sure. I remember one time my mother and daddy were having a big party, and it was going to be just really nice with all kinds of folks that we knew. And they were coming and they were going to have they had a stage built out in the yard, and they would have live music, and I mean, it was going to be great. All best friends and kin folks and stuff. And about an hour before the company was to arrive, I went under the side porch, and there were some interesting looking containers under that, and were filled up with tar from putting on a new roof. And I got into that an hour before the company was to come, and I had tar all over my brand new dress and all. Oh, I got into all kinds of mischief. My mother was very frustrated with me at that time.
I suspect so.
I was covered up with it. I can remember the old Ford when I was a little bitty girl that had a rope on the back of the seats that you could put your coat over. And it was cold back there because I always had to have blankets and stuff. It didn't have adequate heat like they do now. This is old-fashioned cars. Well, I went to school in a little Somerset school, and from the time I was first grade to third grade, first, second, and third, and then they closed it up. It was meant in the days it was built to be a high school, and it was from grade 1, first grade, all the way through high school. In those times, you know, the little area were the only people who came to it. And then they closed the school permanently.
And then where did you go?
Gordonsville.
Gordonsville?
By buses. Because they didn't have any buses when we started out. So my parents had to get me there. And I was too young to do that long walk.
Do you remember Pearl Harbor?
Oh, yes. I remember sitting in my grandparents' home. They didn't have electric lights at the time. And they had the oil lamps on the mantelpiece. And I remember them glowing, that smelling, you know, in the evening. And we were talking about it, and as a little girl, I can remember, this is serious. Sounds scary to me. Real scary. And I got scared. how wonderfully we did during World War II. And everybody stuck together, and everybody tried, and everybody worked to save our country. And I saw that work. There were some hard times through World War II with rationing and gas mileage and not as many things. You couldn't buy tires. Just a lot of things that were lacking. Sugar was rationed. But we made it through. Whereas with some of these recent things, everybody's just against each other. And that bothers me.
Now, you were very close to the railroad tracks.
Very close. And because of that, we had air raid practices because we were near the tracks. And Bill Johnson, who was a merchant in the village, with his store, had contact all over the county. And so he was made the head of the air raids and stuff. And so he would have practices, and we had to pull all our curtains shut and close out the lights and all that kind of stuff. So we had lights out practices because the railroad was carrying troops and equipment and weapons all the time, just solid almost. Troops would go by, and then cannons would go by, and tanks would go by, and I remember waving at the soldiers. I'd climb up on the whiteboard fences and wave to them, and they could see me, this little girl waving to them, and they'd wave back.
Do you remember FDR's funeral train?
Yes, I do.
Oh, tell me about that.
Well, it came through when we were children, of course, or young children, young people, and it just came through with a great big fanfare, and you could see all the soldiers standing guard in the honor of the president, and it was a memorial train, and it was going very slowly, and from Weyburn, because I could see Weyburn all the way to Somerset, and it just went slowly by our house. And people out in the fields and stuff would come to the railroad tracks to watch it and to honor our former president. The locals made stops in Somerset, but they all stopped at Weyburn, which is just a half a mile from our house, for watering and coal.
So you graduated from high school in Gordonsville?
In Orange, because after Gordonsville, 6th grade, my parents and neighbors got together to bring us girls from the neighborhood, or anybody from the neighborhood who wanted to take advanced classes or language classes at the high school, which I did, and I took 3, and advanced maths and things like that, which made it better for me to go to college.
But were you on the honor roll?
Yes.
So you were an A student?
Most of the time. And I was class president a lot of times, and SCA officer some of the time, and that kind of stuff. And I was the head of the, when I was a senior, I was in charge of our little contribution to the paper, Orange Review. It was always the senior editor, and I was it, all senior editor. And we were the staff of the Orange Peel, P-E-A-L.
Did you play sports?
I was a cheerleader. That's the way I got into that.
How did you get around back in those days?
My parents were really good. Remember, I was an only child. But my friends' parents were good too, because, you know, they all took turns to get their daughters out of the world in that little circle there. So they got us to Orange and Charlottesville and Gordonsville and all the places we had to go. And they took turns.
So where did you go to college?
I went 2 years at West Hampton, and then I went to 2 years at UVA.
And your major?
It was education. elementary education.
And did you become a school teacher
Yes, for 32 years.
here in Orange?
Yes. Well, no, in Patrick County, Chesterfield County, Orange County, and surrounding counties, wherever I was.
So your first job was where?
Grimes School. I think I was there a half a year before they were able to move to the new building. And I did social studies for 4th, 5th, and 6th grade, I think, at that time.
So can you tell me the story about how and when you met Harry?
Oh, indeed. I remember it well, because he and I talked about it. Our good friend, Carla Estes, was dating another good friend, Frank Brizzelacker. And we both knew them both. But Harry and I had never met. But we each knew them. And she said, would you like to go on a blind date with us? And sure. And so that's when they introduced Harry and Carlene on this blind date. And we had not met each other through the circle of years, because Harry was at Woodbury. His dad was a teacher over there. He was head of the science department. And Harry went to school there when he was age appropriate. And we went to Orange schools. So we just, our paths hadn't crossed, thank God. But we met that day, that evening. We went over and had Cokes or something at his house, Carla and Frank and Harry and me. And we just got to know each other. The four of us got to know each other. And we all became really good friends. So we had our first date, and blind date, and we just chatted and talked and visited. And then the next time we got together, I think it was a pool party. So he invited a lot of teenagers that I knew. And we all had a big pool party, the second date, which was fun. I knew everybody there. But his parents invited Frank and Carla and Harry and me to their house. They had a house on the beach down at Cherry Grove, which was not very far from Myrtle Beach. And so the four of us were invited at the same time to go to the beach with his parents, which we did, which was fun. And that was when that picture was taken. So that was the first time that we met.
Was it love at first sight?
Yes. Well, we didn't know it, but we looked back over the pictures and we remembered we didn't have many dates after that with anybody else. But we each had some, but he went away to the Marines, I went away to college, so it was a long distance. We wrote back and forth, and he would see me when he came home, leave, and that kind of thing.
Now, about what year was this?
51. They sent him to Norfolk, and he was in Norfolk Naval Base, which they often put Marines in, naval stuff. And so I always figured that was a fortunate thing and a good experience for him, because he worked with some high-powered men at the naval base, which was a good experience. But we kept thinking he'd be sent overseas any time. But he wasn't. They just kept him in that area. And then he was shipped to Norfolk to do the same kind of thing.
So when were you married?
53. That's an old meat house.
Where?
At Milford Dairy Farm. That's a meat house.
Right.
Daddy's hams were hanging in it. Right by the railroad. Well, he was still a Marine. I was still in college. And so I lived in Milford and got an apartment in Charlottesville. And so I continued at UVA. And he was still a Marine. But because he was in Norfolk, he got to come home right often. So that worked out. And that was nice.
Yeah.
And so he got out a year later.
Hmm?
He got out a year later.
What did Harry do during all this time?
He worked on the farm. He loved it. Just absolutely loved it. It was the best thing he ever did. And he learned so much. He would buy books. He was brought up in an academic surroundings, and he'd buy books about how to feed cows and how to make the mixtures and how to breed them and all that kind of stuff. And he would just study it and study and study. And all those few years in there were complete education. He'd get up at 3:30 in the morning and work in the dairy. And then he'd be exhausted. He'd take a nap in the middle of the day and then go back in the afternoon and work in the dairy till supper time. So, but the hard work was hard, but he loved it.
Mm-hmm. And so he did that his whole life?
No, he just did that for a few years.
Okay.
And then he was hired in the Richmond area by the U.S. Department of Agriculture. John Estes, who was a county agent at the time, knew him well. And he thought he could do one of the jobs that was stemming from that, working with farmers and things. And Harry got really interested in that, but the county didn't hire him. They didn't know him. And the farmers had to vote, and they didn't know him. And so he went to Richmond to talk to him about it, to see whether he was really up to it, up for it, whether he would like it, and he thought he would. So he put his name on the list, and they hired him. So we moved to Richmond. And we lived in Richmond for about 6 years, and they gave him big districts to cover. And he was responsible for overseeing maybe as many as 13 counties. Then those counties would change and they'd give him another district, and we'd move again. But he got to know Virginia real well. We both did. We loved it.
Yeah.
And so then they sent him back, so he moved back to Orange County. And he had to oversee the federal spending. He was in charge of that. So there was a big responsibility.
He was basically the USDA representative
Yes.
for this area.
Right. He visited the farms. He talked to farmers. He had a farmers group.
Did you do soil conservation?
Oh, yes.
Right.
Did a lot of conservation. And he was a big conservationist because he believed in that very much. And water conservation, too. Building the ponds.
Now you had, how many children?
We had 2 boys, and we had 3. We lost one
Well,
when he was about 6. Almost 6, 5.
was it an accident?
No, he was born prematurely, and he had a lot of things wrong with him. And he had to stay in the hospital most of his life.
Oh.
And he ended up at the School for the Deaf and the Blind in Lynchburg in his last years. So he was just sick all his life.
That must have been hard on you.
It was hard. And after we retired, we stayed in Unionville for a while. And then we decided we're going to need a smaller house. Our house was too large, and it had 4 acres with it, 5 acres, 6 acres, I don't know. But it had too much to take care of as we were getting older. And so we decided we needed to move to town with a small yard. So we moved to Boxley Lane, which had 4 acres. But after big farming lands, that seemed like a small amount to us. Which 4 acres got to be huge. And then we decided we needed to move here eventually. But we had some good times in there because we became antique hunters, and Harry liked woodworking, and I liked flower arranging, and we had a lot of good fun times and trips. We were very close. We were just best of friends as well as being married.
So what's the trick? What's the magic the magic thing for a good relationship like that?
One of my doctors asked me that, and I told him that you had to love her better than yourself.
Have you had any life-threatening emergencies?
Yes,
Tell me about those.
I have myasthenia gravis, which is a neurological problem, and that came to light a few months back, and I had a spell of it, and they took me to the hospital real fast, and I stopped breathing. It's a system that's in charge of the automatic systems in our body, and I stopped breathing. But between Martha Jefferson and the rescue squads and everybody, they got me back. So I've had life-threatening. I will have more. I never cried a day. I never cried yet. Doesn't do any good. But it's what he wanted. He said if he had to stay over there and he couldn't be any better capacity than he was, he didn't want to live. I said, okay, I understand that.
So do you have any words of advice for the younger generation?
Work hard. Don't play it away. That chance, the youth comes by only once. I think too many kids nowadays don't take life seriously. They all thinking about me and what I can get. The only thing I think you can get is what you make. We might overthink some things, but I think mainly we are together as a group more than I think people are now. I think we think as a country, as a whole group, like a family.